production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member A2H, engineers, architects, and planners, creating an enhanced quality of life for our clients and community. To learn more about A2H's services and markets, visit a2h.com.
The WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mayor Strickland and District Attorney Weyrich tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Mayor Jim Strickland, City of Memphis. Thanks for being here. And Amy Weyrich, District Attorney for Shelby County. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Along with Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So we're here to talk about crime. We did a show on crime a couple weeks ago from a sort of different perspective with Harold Collins and Keith Norman and Josh Spickler from Just City. That was an interesting conversation that people, if interested in this, should go back and watch about sentencing reform and kids getting into the criminal justice system at a young age. We'll talk about some of that, but right now I think people are very focused on this spike in crime, the violent crime, particularly homicides. And so for each of you, a very simple question that's very hard to answer: what can you do from your seat to reduce this increase in violent crime?
Well, in the short term, I'm not sure how much we can do. In the long term, I think we can make a real headway. In the short term, we've taken action short term. The results may take a while. The action we've taken is we've reorganized the police force. We have more police officers out on the street right now than we did when I took office on January 1st. We've reorganized the multi-agency gang task force, the organized crime unit, really picking up the effort in those regards. We're bringing back the PSTs this summer that would free up police officers so they wouldn't have to respond to auto accidents. They can do policing and
when will they be on? And for people, I remember that when I first moved to Memphis, they were uniformed, but they were not police officers, and they would come and sort of take everybody's names and make sure everything got coordinated in a minor fender bender type situation. Right?
Memphis is one of the few cities across the country that has police respond to every auto accident.
Right.
And it's kind of, frankly, a waste of resources for a commissioned officer. PSTs were kind of junior police officers. They are uniformed. They have the full force of the law behind them, but they can respond to accidents and help in other regards. That frees up some resources that we can put back on the street. We've partnered with the Sheriff's Office and with the Tennessee Highway Patrol's office to put more boots on the ground. We implemented a plan with the Downtown Memphis Commission that's on Beale Street, and I think it's been very effective on that. So we are taking immediate action, but frankly, especially with homicides, they're very hard to predict. So many of them involve people who know each other and certainly are in a relationship. And because it's hard to predict, it's hard to prevent.
Is that a maddening and frustrating thing for you as mayor? I mean, you're just about 6 months as this show airs. I think it's exactly 6 months. You have a whole lot of authority. You have all kinds of power. You know, you've been around government forever, and now 6 months. But this homicide rate is, I think, the majority of it is between people who know each other. It's beyond your control. Is that a maddening thing for you?
It's very depressing. I mean, every single homicide that I learn about, it's very depressing, very sad for the families, for the loss of that human potential there. But it is a little bit frustrating because I can't do much about it immediately. But it also makes me more determined to keep on track with what we're doing. I've talked about policing, but we also need to get tougher laws for violent criminals.
Right.
And we also need to do a better job intervening in the lives of young people so that they pick the right path and not the wrong path.
I want to come back to those themes a whole lot here, but let's get Amy Weyrich involved. In your office, you, to some degree, I mean, some might say, you see the people involved in this after the crime has happened.
Sure.
But is there anything your office can do, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, to get the trend that was declining in Memphis and Shelby County back on track to where violent crime is declining?
I hope so. Certainly the efforts that we participate in on a daily basis, it's a big reason why we fight the truancy fight every school year, because if kids are in school, good things are happening for them. If they're not in school, they have a much greater likelihood of ending up on that bad path. GRASSY is a gang intervention program that our office and other agencies started when I headed up the gang unit. And every year that gets bigger and better, and more opportunities are provided for prevention and intervention. But what we also do very well, and better than any DA's office in the country, is hold people accountable. The police department, I think their solve rate for the far too many homicides we've had this year is over 80%. And our office does a very good job of holding those people accountable and seeking the maximum penalty under the law.
And I should say, you mentioned the police department, as did you. We tried to have interim director Rawlings on, couldn't just because of scheduling things. So that's the only reason that
Well,
he's
there's
not
a
here.
conference in Baltimore about youth violence, and he's
Right. So he's doing a very important thing right now. So I should just mention that. You talk a little bit about holding people accountable, and then I'll bring Bill in. There's a lot, we've talked about it on the show with you before, and we talked about it in the show I mentioned a few weeks ago. When you talk about holding people accountable, is that about all crimes? Is that everything from an expired license to some sort of violent crime, or is there a different sort of calibrated approach to the type of response your office should have based on what the offense is? And again, back to the show we just had, people talked about how expired licenses. Harold Collins spoke really eloquently about it, that when kids are busted for an expired license, it's against the law, they shouldn't be busted for it. It starts them on a path in the criminal justice system that is kind of a downward spiral. Do you see that in your office, and do you think your office can do more to avoid that kind of downward spiral?
We can and we do. We have a lot of diversion programs, opportunities for people to get out of the criminal justice system. Our office carries the baton on expungement, and working with the mayor have been able to give people the opportunity to clear their record. But that's why we have drug court and veterans court and mental health court. We probably spend more time and energy dismissing charges from individuals that have gotten caught up in the wrong end of the law. It's the worst of the worst that we want to be able to swing the biggest hammer against. And every day, prosecutors in our office are holding people's lives in their hands and making that very important decision that will hopefully keep that offender from ever coming back to the criminal justice system. Because if we can do that, then it's good for that individual and his or her family, and it's better for the community.
All right, Bill.
So to her point, Mayor, is there something that police should be doing on the front end? Is it up to the police perhaps to look at a case like that and say, this is not someone we need to charge at this point?
This is when I wish the police director were here to answer that question. It's awfully hard to ask the police not to enforce the law. And I can't sit here and tell them not to do that. An interesting sidelight of body cameras, when those are in full force, that's going to actually document, and it may have more of those young people may get charged because it's being recorded. And therefore that kind of takes away some discretion that the police may have. So it actually may result in more criminal prosecutions or arrest maybe or citations. What the real solution, though, is to lay the groundwork so that that young person's not in that position on the front end. And that's what we need to do as a community. And I've talked about it before and probably talked about it on the show. We've got to intervene in these kids' lives so that they get a good education, and then when they're out of school, they have something productive to do, like the Boys and Girls Club and Memphis Athletic Ministries and Streets Ministries, and at our community centers and our libraries. If we get these children in our programs more, when they're not in school, they get that structure, they get that background, they're helped, they get life training and job skills, and they'll be, and hope that they can have a future. So if we really focus on early childhood education and reading levels and giving kids something productive to do after school, I think we can really turn this around.
General Wyrick, is someone who is a nonviolent offender, is that a different group of people than a violent offender, or do nonviolent offenders become violent offenders with the recidivism rate that we see? Because at times in these discussions, it's like we're talking about two different groups of people, but I'm not sure they're always different groups of people.
I guess they overlap. you know, in 25 years of working in the DA's office and handling misdemeanors and felonies, you certainly see when you look at somebody's rap sheet who's before you now on a homicide, a murder, you can certainly look back and see that trend building, see it starting with the truancy and with the theft as a juvenile, and then inching up to disorderly conduct and assault, property crimes, and then oftentimes, yes, those property crimes do find their way into becoming violent crimes. But it's why, you know, we spend 99% of the people that we encounter on a daily basis are going to be serving their sentence in the community. And there's going to be some probationary requirements on them. And we work very hard to try to rehabilitate, and working with the judges and the defense attorneys and the community to keep these people from re-offending. But for those ones that just can't get the message, we're very blessed to have tough laws in this state and a team of prosecutors that aren't afraid to use them.
Should our tough approach to that include an emphasis on fines and fees that you pay? Because that's also the other thing that we hear so much about, is that this person is back in the system essentially because they owe the system money.
For minor offenses in some cases. And again, that Harold Collins
Right.
and Josh Spickler from Just City and Keith Norman, Reverend Keith Norman, they talked about that. That, you know, so one example is the bail situation, that if you get a $500 bail, well, everybody at this table would be able to cover that, or a friend or whatever. But for a lot of kids who aren't on a bad path but have just made a mistake, that $500 is insurmountable. I think that's in part what they talked about, was these fees add up for people. And people talked about it in Ferguson, that the number of fees and the court fees and the traffic tickets for somebody working a minimum wage job pile up in a way that becomes insurmountable. And they kind of give up, and so the fees get to be more, the paid tickets pile up, and it, as again, just quoting Harold and Keith Norman, they spend all this time in the criminal justice system, it becomes somewhat inevitable. I think that's
we don't have debtor's prison, first and foremost. So, and I think there are many judges down at 201 Poplar that work for months and sometimes years with offenders if they're showing that they're making an effort to make those payments, because that fine and those court costs, that's part of your sentence. You know, with a lot of our crimes in this state, it's a mandatory fine that has to be paid. That's part of your punishment, if you will. But the judges bend over backward, and our office does. If you're making an effort, restitution is also, you know, a huge part of this conversation. And we always have to remember the victims. And there's nothing more frustrating to a property crime victim.
Can I add something in there?
Yeah, sure.
For a small part of that, the expungement fee, I learned from General Wyrick and others that people could qualify to get their records expunged, but they couldn't afford the $450 court cost. Well, we raised almost $60,000, and we're working with General Wyrick's office to allow them to get their records expunged. And they have a waiting list down there, and we're going to clear that waiting list out, and then we'll continue to raise money until everyone can have a chance.
And for people who aren't familiar with that is, say, a felon who went to jail, is out, but there's a time after which that should be cleared from the records, but it takes time, money, and effort to get it cleared out of all the electronic records.
In general, it's got to be a nonviolent offense, and you can't be arrested in 5 years.
Okay.
It has to be your only crime.
Okay.
And you have to have paid off all of the conditions and complied with all of the conditions that the judge put on you.
Okay.
Yes.
And the theory being there that if they go and apply for a job and it pops up and says, hey, you're qualified, you're great, but you've got a felony on your record. Well, wait, I served my time and time has passed and I did everything right. Well, it's still in the record next.
It's hard to get a job or a better job.
Okay.
And then we're doing that, we're tying them in with WIN, Workforce Investment Network, to give them some job training, skills on writing resumes, and helping them find a job.
So there's been legislation in Nashville to drop that particular fee, and the fee is basically split up, as I understand it. It's a revenue stream for several different agencies as well. Public defenders, is your office one of the revenue streams?
We do, because we do all the work.
Right, you do the background checks that shows that this person is a good
It's
risk
qualified,
for it.
Because what we don't want people thinking they've got to hire an attorney to then come in and take advantage of this legislation that's been passed. So for all of the listeners and viewers out there, you do not need to waste money on an attorney to take advantage of this statute. Our office handles that.
But for you, for both of you are elected officials, but you're the more recently elected one, and you ran on a very tough on crime. I mean, crime was, you talked about it over and over as part of your speech, part of every debate, I think, being more tough on crime. you've got to, there are people listening who are saying that's not enough. They're talking about big picture things and felons who've served their time. I want to know that I'm safe and my family's safe and my friends are safe tomorrow. How, again, do you answer that, that people who really are just worried about their own safety and feel like this violent crime rate is getting out of control?
Well, we've actually made progress, and nothing to celebrate. We're not going to have a parade down 2nd Street tomorrow, but January and February were really bad. But the changes that we put in place, March, April, May, and so far this month, were less than where we were last year. So we're making improvement. The changes we are making improvement. In addition, we got to have more police officers.
Yeah, where are we on that?
We're down to about 2,000 officers. We need 2,400. We're down 400 officers.
And it has the tide of the decline, the departures. Is that stopped, or are you still seeing a lot of departures?
No, well, there's always departures. We
Right,
normally
but
lose.
it was a net loss for a while there, going back to pension benefits and pensions and frustrations on the part of the union and so on.
In normal years, we lose about 100 officers because officers retire, people change jobs, and so forth. The problem is we were losing more than that. The last 2 years, we lost 350 officers when we normally would have lost 200. So that's 150 extra officers, and they were not being hired. So that's why we had
Why were they not being hired?
There were no classes, which is one of the reasons I voted against the budgets the last few years when I was on the council, because they weren't bringing in new officers. We're aggressively trying to recruit them now, and we're aggressively trying to retain our officers.
And back to retention, you passed a 2% raise for fire, is that correct? Or for police, excuse me.
2% for fire and like a 2.5% to 3.5% for police, depending on how long you've been there.
12-year mark. And
Bill.
you also just this week announced a $500 bonus in effect.
Yeah, we had a surplus in the police budget, and we thought we'd pass it on to, I wish it were more, but we passed it on to the officers who deserve it, and which is the entire force. And we're listening to the officers, and we're telling them that we know that we have to better compensate them. And this was the first step in multi-year steps. We're also talking about the benefits they have that are better than our sister cities, like the DROP plan, which is a retirement benefit they get. They get 6.5% increase in their pay for a college degree, which is better than some other cities. So there are good things in our pay package right now. We're trying to communicate with them, tell them we truly do appreciate them, we want to stay, and we're going to make it better.
How does it work with, and I'll go back to Bill, how does it work in terms of, there's policing and then there's policing. And so there's community policing and there's Blue Crush and there's a broken window strategy, or there's a kind of, what is the approach you want to see, that you want to see in this first 6 months? And then we'll segue into that you want to see your new police director, because Rawlings is an interim. What are those police strategies that you think are most effective for a city like Memphis?
Well, the two big things are data-driven policing, we call it Blue Crush, New York calls it CompStat, and more officers. Because we often talk about New York City in 1994, where they really started this push, and since then they've reduced crime by 70 or 80%. Well, they did it through those two things, a huge increase in police officers and data-driven policing. But I also believe in community policing, and we have to do more of that. We're right now, frankly, only doing it in 2 neighborhoods, North and South Memphis, but we need more manpower. And community policing, getting out in the community, letting them know who the police officers are, building a relationship, building trust, that's very important. So it's frankly those 3 things.
Right. Bill?
Every month I look at the Crime Commission statistics as soon as they come in. And while there's so much attention about the homicides, I think the largest category in those monthly statistics by numbers are the aggravated assaults. And the mayor said that homicides are kind of a different problem, but are the assaults an indicator of where we're going with the homicide rate?
Very much so. We have always said that if we could get a handle on that aggravated assault number, it will pay big dividends in the homicide arena. What we know from the homicides that have happened this year, over half of them are situations where the suspect and the defendant knew each other. Oftentimes, today's aggravated assault is going to be next week's homicide, because it's either going to be gang related or group related. And while somebody is laying in the med having been shot up because of the latest feud, somebody else that's affiliated with that individual is going to go out and get some justice on the street. So if we can, using the policing techniques that the mayor is referring to, as well as proactive policing, getting the police officers into those areas where we know this crime is happening. But the other word that keeps coming up is community, and it takes the community to be a part of that conversation and to be a part of that work. If you see something that makes you suspicious and nervous, call the police. I'm amazed everywhere I go in this community when people say, well, I wasn't sure and I didn't really get a good look at them. It doesn't matter. The police would much rather you be wrong than to find out that it was a crime that maybe they could have stopped.
Does some of that, though, reflect, and again, the folks a couple weeks ago talked about this, a distrust of the police? I'm not sure I can call that police officer and they're going to believe me when I say this is going on.
I think there's some of that. I do not think it's to the extent that other folks did, because when I go out into neighborhoods, they want police presence. They want more patrols in their neighborhood. So I think the overwhelming majority of this city supports the police and want more of them.
Yeah.
We learned that through the gang injunctions. You know, those are legal procedures that we have used in the worst of the worst neighborhoods, and the communities there were starving for that. And when those police officers ride through those neighborhoods, even today, they are hailed as heroes because they brought peace to that little corner of our city.
And can I go back to the aggravated assault for a second? Led by General Wyrick, we all went up as a team to the state legislature and said we need some stiffer penalties for domestic violence, which is a huge problem. She can speak to it better than I can. And we got that passed this year, which it used to be if you were convicted of a misdemeanor aggravated assault, it would be a misdemeanor the first time, the fourth time, the 8th time, the 10th time. Now it's like DUI where the penalty increases after multiple offenses because it's not just policing, it's the community being involved with the young people, but it's also these laws that can help us put away violent criminals for a longer period of time.
Let's switch to the search for police director. Where are we for people who aren't following it day to day here? Where do we stand?
The application deadline's passed. I do not know who the candidates are. I do not know how many have applied. The International Association of Police Chiefs is reviewing them, will present to me the top 4, 5, or 6 candidates, and then we'll set up interviews from there.
The Commercial Appeal filed a lawsuit claiming those were a public record and wanting to get access to what I think they thought were about 20 people. Bruce McMullen, the city attorney, came back and said, no, we can't do that. Our contract with this third party has privacy clauses and so on. I'm not going to argue with 2 lawyers about the legalities of that. So, but even if that is that's the contract in the situation, is that right? I mean, as a position that is so important to people, the issue is so important from an economic, from a quality of life point of view, shouldn't the people the citizens, have more of a window on the type of people applying and the type of finalists you're looking at?
Well, I know people in the media, they want headlines. What I want is public safety. And I think that's the difference between me and the Commercial Appeal. It would have a chilling effect on people applying for jobs if their application were immediately available to the public. It would have a chilling effect. And
chilling in the sense that they wouldn't apply.
Yes, because the average person, when they apply for a new job, they don't want their current employer to know they applied for the job. It would have a chilling effect. Therefore, good people wouldn't apply, and therefore, so what the Commercial Appeal is doing, I think, will hurt public safety. Plus, they're wrong on the law. But when we get the finalists done, 3, 4, 5, 6, then we will release those names to the public, and we'll have a public process.
Well, the public process, will that include citizen group who can meet them or talk or give input, or no?
I don't know that yet.
Okay, Bill.
Do you have a timeline for when you'll get the list of finalists from them?
I expect in the next week or so, and then I think we'll have a final selection in August.
All right. And I think one of the last times that we talked, you mentioned a figure of up to $250,000. Is that included in your budget that you start running on July 1st?
Yes, sir.
So do you anticipate it's going to take that much? Or?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. I just had to be prepared. A lot depends on the IPC.
International Association of Chiefs of Police.
I get those initials all mixed up all the time. That's one thing I've learned as being mayor. There's all these initials I have to get used to. It's hard.
More cameras, more sky cameras. Talk about the importance of that from your point of view, and does that affect you? But what's going on there?
Well, especially with limited police boots on the ground, Sky cameras are great, and neighborhoods are clamoring to get them. One thing we've got to do is tell neighborhoods that they need to apply more, because we don't have enough neighborhood watches and neighborhoods applying for those grants.
How does that impact you when a case comes to your office and the Sky camera footage? I mean, is that actually meaningful, or is it just a sense of security for the people walking around?
It's both. We hope it's a deterrence, and it also helps us prosecute the bad guys when we can use that footage.
Okay, and body cameras, what's the update?
They're rolling out at Crump, and then will grow slowly so they go throughout the entire Crump station and then beyond there.
When you came on in November, and I'm not going to give near enough time because we talked about it for 5 or 6 minutes, you kind of blew my mind. It was sort of about how complicated this is from a retention point of view. Your office has to look at this footage. You've got, I mean, everything from privacy and so on. Are those rules? That was probably October, November. Do you feel confident you have the rules in place and the staffing in place to deal with all this footage that's going to start flooding in?
Not at all, and that's what we're dealing with the county commission. That's right.
Okay, so you're going to them for you need more money.
I need people to hire to view the footage because it's our duty to redact it and provide it to the defense attorneys. It's going to impact us. It's going to impact the public defender's office. The bandwidth at 201 can't handle it. There's all kinds of issues, but we're working on it every day.
All right, we're out of time. I had about 18 more questions for both of you, but I appreciate both being here. Thanks for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member A2H, engineers, architects, and planners, creating an enhanced quality of life for our clients and community. To learn more about A2H's services and markets, visit a2h.com.